Sound speeds, and welcome to another episode of Speed Bumps. Now, this time I'm actually driving home right as the sun's starting to set, so it gives me an opportunity to try out a new camera, which is a security camera. I am wanting a camera that allows me to pick up an image at night in the dark, and as I did some research, it looks like security cameras might have been the way to go. So I'm going to try it in this episode. Right now, there's a little bit of light in the air. Oh, but more importantly, I did like 6 tests of this camera and never once noticed that the plastic was still on the lens. So now I'm going to actually take it off, and we're going to see how it looks live. Hopefully that looks better than it did before. I thought about shooting the entire episode like that and then saying it at the end, but I figured might as well go ahead and take it off now at the very beginning so we can really try this thing out. I make no claims as to how good the quality is. I'll tell you this, it doesn't look like it's all that great to me. It's only a $35 camera. I think it's a V3 from Wise, and it looked like it had a pretty good low light ability, and that's mainly what I'm using it for. People told me that if I was going to do a podcast here driving home, then I can't just do it audio-wise. I had to do it with picture too. So that's what I'm doing. You have a picture. Now, I make no claims as to how good that picture is, but there you go. There's your picture. So why don't we go ahead and get to the question, and let's not waste any more time. On the topic of overhead miking, could you perhaps recommend some low self-noise, high signal-to-noise ratio shotties? I have some bad experience with a certain deity and have been wondering if there are some other cleaner options. Looking for a microphone with a low self-noise for a cleaner recording. Well, I'm assuming that if you're talking about a DD microphone, you're talking about the S-Mic 2 or S-Mic 2S. And if you are, then what I would say is, regardless of how it's connected up, it could be an issue with the gain staging, one of the components, maybe even an issue with the microphone. And I'm going to show you how to troubleshoot that down. First of all, starting with your microphone, switch out the microphone with another one if you have another one. If you do, and the noise suddenly goes away, then chances are, if the noise floor is regular and a low level at that point, then chances are your microphone is defective. And you may have to go to deitymic.com and put in a support email so that way you can get it exchanged. Hopefully it's still under warranty and it didn't just start doing this all of a sudden. If another microphone has the same exact issue and the self noise you would expect to be lower, then chances are it's going to be something else in the signal chain, starting with your cable. So look at the cable, switch out cables. It's an XLR cable, so change it out for something else. From there, you're going to go into a mixer, interface, or recorder. Make sure that your gain is set correctly and that you are set to an XLR input and that it's basically set correctly. Now, when you're trying to set your gain correctly, there's something called gain staging, which is basically where every single place where you could adjust your gain up the signal chain, starting at the microphone, going all the way up to your interface mixer or recorder, has to be set correctly. And if it's not, then you're going to have high noise. So I'm presuming that you know how to do this, but just in case you don't, or someone listening is not aware, I'm going to go ahead and walk you through the process. You would basically start at your microphone and start tracing up the line. Cable to the very first knob, let's just say that it's an interface. And then you would look at the interface and there's an input gain knob right there that the microphone is plugged into. You will adjust that. And when you adjust that, it is going to go louder or quieter. Set it so that way your levels are not distorted on the high side or too low on the low side. There's a drone going up in the air. Interesting. So here's what I would suggest. Set your level until it's about negative 12 dB. That's usually a good level for it. And some people will say set it for around negative 15 or negative 18 dB. I usually say set it for negative 12, but leave the limiter on. That way, if you do happen to get overly loud and you peak the meter, then it's at least not going to be distorted in that regard. But keeping in mind that every single 6 dB is a doubling or a cut of about half the pressure in the air, so the acoustic vibrations in the air. So if you're talking about 0 dB being a peak, negative 6 dB would be half of that, and negative 12 dB would be a quarter of that. So you're only talking about a quarter of the possible level. So it would take quite a bit more volume in order to push it up into the 0 dB land. So provided that you're just talking and you're not planning on screaming and then whispering, shouldn't be an issue with your gain there. Now, if you have set your gain correctly all the way up the line, and your microphone, when you swap out a microphone, and if it is If it's also noisy, you know that the issue is somewhere down the line, starting with your cable. Then from the cable, it could be an interface. And if you swap out your cable and it's still noisy, try your interface. There could also, I would say, replace your drivers, try a different firmware, maybe factory reset your software, whatever you're recording in, or try recording in something completely different, another DAW. So if you use, for example, GarageBand, maybe try Audacity. See if Audacity is going to work for you. Whatever you want to try is fine, but what I would say is try different options on everything going up the signal chain, and you'll see if you're going to get better results, because a DAD shouldn't be an issue with regards to self noise. It should be on the lower side. You should be able to get a good recording out of the DAD S-Mic 2 or S-Mic 2S. Now, if you are talking about the V-Mic D3 or D3 Pro, the only thing that would be different there is that on the D3 Pro, there's a little volume knob on the back. So adjust it there and set your gain properly. Maybe I'd say start with a 5 and then see where your level goes from there. Try experimenting. Go up to 7, 8, 9, something like that. See if when you're louder there and you turn down your preamp on the other side, if it makes the signal better or if it makes it worse. Because chances are, if you're getting a noisy recording, then the gain is not set correctly on the D3 Pro. Now, if you're talking about going into a camera and you're saying it's noisy there, it very well could be the preamps on your camera. Usually they're on the noisy side. So, especially noisier than a mixer interface or recorder. So at that point, I would say make sure that you do experiments. I even have a video about this that Baron Guyard did in collaboration with me. He actually presented some information for you, and I would say strongly recommend check that video out, because you'll want to do something similar to test out your preamps on your camera, because a DAD microphone should not have a noise floor issue. There's a lot of different issues out there in the world that you could run into, but on a DAD, you're not likely to run into a self noise as being one of them. For the sound tips portion of this episode, I thought I would discuss good sound versus natural sound. They can be the same, but they can also be different. Let me start by defining both of them. Good sound is basically low noise, adequate signal, and having a good tonal quality. Natural sound is sounding like the actual thing does. There used to be a definition of hi-fi sound, meaning the more realistic sounding it is. I don't know if that definition has changed, but it used to be back in the 90s, when I remember looking up the definition of it last, that it was basically the most accurate and natural representation of something. Now, at least that was in the book I looked it up in. Yes, we're talking book, not internet. So when you're talking about good sound, the microphone you are using could have a very good tonal quality to it. It may be that it has an extra amount of bass. It may be that it has a very low noise floor and the tonal quality of it is really good and rich. It could be that it has a lot of a presence that allows you to hear the detail in someone's voice, but it could also be that it just rejects out a lot of the background noise around you. It could be that you just like the sound of one particular microphone more so than another, and because you hear differently than everyone else, it could just be that the total quality is something that jives with you and that you could hear it well, because different people hear differently. And so what sounds good to you may not sound good to me, and that is usually a tonal quality related thing where someone's going to say, this sound is driving me crazy. But it also could be because there's a buzz on the microphone that one person's able to pick up and not someone else. It could be that the signal chain has something in there that creates a really weird warbling effect, or someone hears RF in it. It could be that someone has presbycusis, and presbycusis would cause you to have high frequency hearing loss. So you may not like something because it's too dark of a microphone. You might need to have a brighter microphone so that way you can punch through and get a good quality recording out of something with a little bit more highs. Whatever the case may be, sounding good in this case is something that is pleasing to your ears and pleasing to listen to. Now, natural sound is something that sounds like the thing that you are miking up. So, if I have a microphone that is very flat, it's 1 meter away, it is hopefully going to sound pretty natural at picking up someone's voice, because at 1 meter away, that's where most microphones have their have their noise statistics and specifications measured at. So at that point, what you would basically have is a situation where your background noise is going to be good and your signal is going to be good, and it's going to sound like it would sound like if you were to put your ear right where that microphone is. It's not going to sound distorted. It's not going to be overly bassy. It's going to sound natural with regards to the way that the microphone picks up your sound and the world around it. So if you're talking about good sound and you're talking about natural sound, a microphone can be both. But here's the issue that you normally run into. When you're talking about natural sound, you have to play to the physics of sound. So that means as you get farther away, the bass in someone's voice is going to fall off too. Now, if I were to back off farther and farther away from you, what you would hear is my voice sounds higher and higher pitch. Now, some microphones have a presence boost that would make it help you punch through, but it doesn't do anything to the bass. So the bass is going to fall off quicker than the presence, the mids and highs would. So you're only going to hear the mids and highs in my voice, which sound very natural. But then some microphones also boost the bass. So when you have them closer, it sounds very bass heavy. It sounds darker. Therefore, when you get it farther away, those are not as prominent, and therefore you hear it in a microphone more flat at that point, because as opposed to embellishing the low end, you're going to actually start to pick that up a little bit less. And so when you pick that up less and less and less as you get farther away, it's going to go from sounding like a movie theater sound to sounding more natural, because you're not going to have bass up here and everything else is this level. You're going to have the bass start to fall off, and it will even out with the rest of the signal. So that is what a lot of people refer to when they say, wow, that sounds so cinematic, that sounds good. They usually refer to the ability of a microphone to reach and sound even across all frequencies the farther away it gets. Now, some microphones just don't play that game. Some microphones will go for a very natural sound, whether you are close or you're farther away. And at 1 meter away, or wherever it happens to be measured from, that is the basis that they're going for, the natural type sound. So if you go farther away, you may say, man, this microphone is just not picking up. It's just not reaching very well. But that's not an issue with the microphone, because it's going for a natural sound, as opposed to a microphone that boost the bass a little bit, is a darker sound, has more extended low end, as Rode refers to it with the NTG3, for example, or has that MKH sound from Sennheiser that we're all very familiar with, something along those lines. But I'll tell you this, you have to keep in mind that when you are talking about sound, it is possible for it to sound good or natural or both. If it sounds pleasing to your ear, it sounds good. If it also sounds very natural and that's what sounds good to you, then it will also sound good. But there are some people that I've worked with in the film industry that don't like certain microphones because they say it just doesn't have any reach. I'm like, no, it sounds natural. It doesn't sound natural to me. It sounds like it's lacking. I'm like, well, what is it lacking? Low end when it's far away. Well, that's natural. You're not going to convince somebody of that necessarily in an argument, but I will tell you this. There is a difference. And so whether you like good sound that is natural or good sound on its own, there's no problem with either one. It is a personal preference, and you can kind of, I don't want to say educate someone, but you can enlighten them and let them know about the acoustics of sound with regards to being picked up by a flatter microphone or by one that kind of colors the sound and kind of creates its own special sound signature when it records or when it picks up something, not records, because microphones don't record. But if you're talking about an actual sound that sounds good, sometimes a microphone is just blessed to sound good. And when that is the case, excellent, great. It has good detail. It's got a nice crisp dialogue, but it's not overly crisp. It doesn't sound muddy in the lows. It doesn't sound overly present in the highs and just sharp, whatever. If it sounds good to your ear, then it's going to be a good sounding microphone as far as most people are concerned. Now, if more people like the sound of a particular microphone, a lot of people are going to really say, oh, that's a good sounding microphone, as opposed to people that would say, no, that microphone doesn't sound good. What are you talking about? It doesn't sound good at all. I don't like that microphone. Even though you might, because you perhaps have a different preference than them, or perhaps you have hearing damage. And, there's a lot of excuses I could make, but there's a lot of factors that come into play with regards to what sounds good. But natural is pretty much straight across the board. Does it sound like it's picking up the acoustic vibrations in the air in a very natural way. So there you have it, another episode of the Speed Bumps podcast in the can. I would like to hear your comments down in the description as to what you think about the camera I used. Granted, it was a very cheap camera. I think I bought the thing for $35. It's a security camera designed for you to basically record through the internet to either their online system that you pay for monthly, or you can have it set to record to the internal SD card. And that's what I'm doing, is I'm taking the internal SD card on that camera and going to be putting it in my computer. So we'll see what happens when I get into post and look at the exact quality of it. Now, it does send out a signal for me to look at and monitor on a tablet, and that's a very low resolution image. But it looks to me like, from the look of it, occasionally there'll be a blindingly bright spot across my eyes, which are coming from the rear view mirrors through my rear view mirror. And but it looks like for the rest of it, it's picking up colors and stuff pretty decently in very low light, which is really cool. I might have to use this again to record in my car sometime. I mean, obviously I will during the Speed Bumps podcast if it continues. Like, I think this episode is episode 7, if memory serves. I know that there's, I think 3 more episodes, and I've ordered basically 10 for this Speed Bumps podcast test. But if you're enjoying it so far, let me know down in the description. I know this podcast is not going to be for everyone. It's going to sound like the ramblings of a middle-aged white guy driving home from work. But hey, what can I say? That's the way it is. Regardless, thanks for tuning into this episode of Speed Bumps, and I will catch you in the next episode with more answers to your questions, more sound tips and tricks, and of course, as always, sound advice.
I'm recording this in 32-bit floating point because I know Alan loves it. So if you'd like to ask a sound-related question to be answered in a future episode, send text, audio, or video to ssp@soundspeeds.us. The fidelity's totally fine. If you want to record this outro, he loves 32-bit floating point. Send him 32-bit floating point outros. He loves it. You can find all the instructions in the description below. You can find Alan on social media to talk about 32-bit floating point. You can find him on his social media, or just find it all at his website, soundspeeds.us. And while you're here, be sure to subscribe and turn on notifications for more 32-bit floating point sound-related content.